I don't know about y'all. I feel like my childhood's under attack. We have lost, and granted, we lose icons, legends, inspirations every year. There's not a year when we don't lose somebody that we used to watch on the TV screens, see on the movie screens, that may have even inspired us to pursue the type of work that we do, that just inspire us to carry on a day to day basis. It happens every year. But I don't know what it is about 2024. I would say a mix of 2023 and 2024. Akira Toriyama, some of the other mangakas that we've lost, certain musicians that we've lost, and now one of the most pivotal actors that we've ever had to grace the earth. In this video, I'm going to go over a summary, if you will, of the Mr. James Earl Jones. Someone that we've lost very recently. It's now September 14th. We got news that he passed away, I believe, 2 to 3 days ago. I'll say this before I get into it. It's very, very tough to be, a notable performer in any single generation. From Michael Jackson's time to even like 32,000s with rap. And you're talking about a man who was born in the 30s, which I'll get into. The standards were higher. In my opinion, the talent was higher. It's something that can't be avoided when you have icons who come from a time where everybody could be a legend. Everybody. And that's something I pay attention to specifically with music. These are certified legends who stuck out amongst other legends, amongst other people who were not slouches. They were not lightweights. They were not regular everyday talent as far as my generation is concerned. So to stick out in a single generation, whether as an actor, as a musician, even as an athlete, speaks for itself. And now here we are talking about a man who has transgressed multiple generations. The man was almost 100 years old. He was less than 10 years away from being 100 years old. I think it was 92. And he is still pivotal to people as young as me, if not younger. So I find it worthy to create this video where I will go over just a summary of some of the key achievements as well as the legacy of, again, the Mr. James Earl Jones. James Earl Jones was born in 1931, and I might butcher this, in Arcabutla, Mississippi. Arcabutla, Mississippi. Both of his parents were mixed with African American, Irish, and Native American heritage. But as early as 5 years old, Mr. Jones he relocated to Dublin, Michigan, where he ended up residing and being raised by his maternal grandparents, the parents of his mother. He said that he's noted multiple times over the years, I guess, that the process of relocating and just that childhood was so traumatizing for him, where he developed a very severe stutter to the point where he went years without speaking, if like very little, if at all, for years at a time. I didn't get specifically how long he went, but he went apparently multiple years where he barely spoke at all to anybody. Apparently, he had teachers from his childhood that encouraged him to embrace speaking as a form of expression. And that's where everything changed for him. And, this is pivotal because James Earl Jones is known for his very deep voice. His voice is very iconic in itself. It stands out. Like, you really can't mix him up with anybody. He stands out. Specifically, Mr. Jones said that poetry and acting helped him overcome the challenges of his disability. But before he was able to pursue acting, or he chose to pursue acting full time, or he initially majored in pre-med at the University of Michigan until he ultimately majored in drama, therefore graduating as a drama major in 1955. Afterwards, he was set to serve in the United States Army during the Korean War. But because he was a member of the Reserve Officers Training Corps during his undergraduate career, he was commissioned into the Army as a second lieutenant in 1953. After the Korean War ended, ultimately being promoted, where he was discharged as a first lieutenant. So he was promoted from a second lieutenant to a first lieutenant. And after that is where he began to pursue his passion of acting. So once James Earl Jones left the Army. His acting career began in the Ramsdale Theater in Manistee, Michigan, where he made his Broadway debut, ranging from the late 50s, 1950s, primarily in 1958 in the play The Egghead, as an understudy to Lloyd Richards, excuse me. From there, Mr. Jones continued his string of positively reviewed performances for his contributions to different plays such as Sunrise at the Campobello, King Lear, including an off-Broadway production known as The Blacks. Throughout the 1960s, Mr. Jones became a very prominent figure in Shakespeare plays, therefore becoming known as a Shakespearean and one of the best Shakespeareans of his time. His rise in reputation in that genre of Broadway acting led to James Earl Jones becoming a household name as early as the 1970s due to his contribution to other works such as Of Mice and Men and particularly Fences, something that we'll touch on a little later. The 70s is also when we nerds, our favorite time comes in. The 1970s is when we nerds see and hear James Earl Jones as one of the most iconic, legendary, and dare I say, badass characters to ever grace our senses across the board. The Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Vader. In the original Star Wars film trilogy, which the first Star Wars film was released in 1977. It was the original Star Wars film, which is now known as Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. It was the original trilogy, but was renamed, if you want to say rebranded or renamed, as Episode 4 when the prequel trilogy came to fruition. He continued this role into the two original sequels, Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, which was released in 1980, and Episode 6, The Return of the Jedi, which was released in 1983. Focusing on the roles aligned with our childhood, for people closer to my age, focusing on us millennials here, and maybe some Gen Z as well. Y'all are right there with us. We recognize Mr. Jones as King Jaffe in Coming to America, Mr. Myrtle in The Sandlot. That's an old one. That's one I don't think I've seen The Sandlot in years. And especially Mufasa in The Lion King, which only makes this hurt that much more because of the timing of it. The timing of it really could not be worse, considering the soon-to-be released Mufasa Lion King movie that's set to be released to theaters December 20th of this year, 2024, which I'm pretty sure we were going to see it anyway as The Lion King. But considering this news, I'm pretty sure millennials, families, and, everybody, I'm pretty sure we're going to show up and show out once that movie drops, especially since, of course, it's right before New Year's. So only makes that much more sense. While we remember him for his film and TV work, at least I do, and I think most people from my generation and the younger generations remember Mr. Jones for his work on the silver screen, as well as our TV screens. His impact actually goes far beyond Hollywood. It's natural that as part of his impact, as part of Mr. Jones' impact, he broke barriers in theater, becoming one of the first Black actors to perform in major roles on Broadway. His work in Fences, again, that's something we'll kind of touch on in a second, and Othello in particular, showcases versatility as a Black Shakespearean and his ability to bring depth to characters that resonated with audiences from all walks of life. Mr. Jones helped pave the way for many actors that are still popular today, even some of the youngest generation of actors who may or may not have crossed his path prior to his passing on, focusing on actors of color, of course, who studied under him directly or indirectly, who interacted with him directly and indirectly. Even us, just as fans, I learned a good bit about the impact and effect he's had on multiple actors and actresses, and how not necessarily heavy of a hand he had in terms of like him being directly like hands on with the development of actors and actresses, but at the same time, some of the biggest actors and actresses that we can think of pulled from him, whether he knew it or not as well. As a result of this, just proof of his impact and as well as his diversity, James Earl Jones proved that he was one of the best to ever set foot on stage as well as in front of a camera, because he's become one of the few entertainers in history to ever earn an EGOT, an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony, covering all of the major awards from all different facets and angles of media and entertainment, something that very few entertainers ever reached. It's a pinnacle that honestly, I don't know how many people, but it's not a common thing. Most people may excel like in music. Most people may have 20 something Grammys and a handful of Tonys, where the case may be, but very few people are able to become well versed across the board. And that's something that Mr. Jones was able to do. One particular indirect protege, at least to my knowledge, an indirect protege of Mr. Jones is the legendary Denzel Washington, who not only is inspirational, legendary, and iconic in his own right, but he actually played the same role in Fences that James Earl Jones played in the Broadway version of it, in the live version version of it, where the main character, the father character, Troy Maxson, was originally played by James Earl Jones early on in his career. And it was one of the first plays that really set him, to stardom, that propelled his name to household, everyday levels. I think it speaks volumes that another generational, multi-generational talent, actually, transgenerational talent, has played the same role and was just as iconic, to the point where, like, I still see clips on Instagram, on TikTok, every once in a while, not as often as I used to, but a lot of people still allude to Denzel's performance in Fences as Troy Maxson, the father, primarily focusing on his tough love scene with his son, ended up being a lesson of responsibility, as well as, in an old fashioned way. It was at the time a way for Troy Maxson, the character played by Denzel and Mr. Jones, respectively, to show that they loved their son, their respective men playing that son character, that they loved their son. But the best way for them as men, old fashioned men at the time, to show that was to emphasize the level of responsibility that they were living up to, that they were charged to live up to take care of their seed, and to, kind of talk about, and I guess emphasize some of the challenges and nonsense that they had to go through on the back end that their son may not see on a regular basis, that allow them to provide for him, to take care of him, and ultimately show that they loved him, even though they may not have been the best, if not flat out terrible, at showing it on an emotional spectrum. Denzel has said that he wanted to be him. He wanted to be Mr. Jones. He wanted to be just like him. And he referred to James Earl Jones as his hero, especially when you know his story of the thing that defined him, his voice. His voice is the one thing that separated him. Well, it's multiple things, but like the one thing that really just anyone could hear and be like, that's James Earl Jones. His voice at one point was the biggest challenge that he had to overcome at one point. But again, it's interesting when you know that his initial challenge, arguably the first major challenge aside from relocating very young, was overcoming the disability of his own voice. And yet his voice has become synonymous with strength and authority and impact over multiple generations. And when you heard him speak, you always listened, whether it was the voice of Darth Vader, for the rage, and especially that first scene of Star Wars Episode 4, the original Star Wars movie, like the rage in the opening scene of Darth Vader, when you're trying to figure out like, why is he coming in so high? And now we have Rogue One that shows that background story, whether it was the wisdom of Mufasa, which we're going to see a different angle of that in the new movie because they've created, additional history to it. So that's going to be interesting. Or even, the narrator of countless documentaries, he had just a rare ability to always come across as profound, to always just draw in attention. It's almost as if he had a weird ability to make the most simplest words mean more than what they actually were, purely just off of how he sounded. But I want to finish this up, guys. His contributions to cinema, theater, culture at large, of course, will never be forgotten. His voice will continue to echo in the hearts of generations who grew up with him, his peers, and of course his proteges, his fans, old and young alike. Everyone he's touched in between the 6 to 7 decades he's been active on that small TV screen to the big silver screen. There's no doubt his legacy will live forever. And I'm personally looking forward now to seeing how people turn up for him when the new Lion King movie drops later this year. I'll go ahead and wrap that video up here, guys. If you have any thoughts, anything like that, how do you feel about the situation, his legacy, the influence he's left on older generations as well as the modern generation for anyone who remembers him. What was your favorite moment about him on the screen? The Darth Vaders, but also other characters. What was your response to the news that he had passed? All that stuff, man. But I'll go and leave that here. I'll see you guys in the next video.